Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin Gray, and I'm here with Ashley Powell, and we are so excited to talk with you today about leveraging student thinking to create grade level on ramps. We thought we would start by just doing a quick introduction of ourselves, but maybe in a more unique way, where we thought about things that were unique to each of us and things that we had in common. So I'll start and then I'll pass it off to Ashley. I'm Kristin Gray. I live in Lewis, Delaware. I taught and coached for 22 years, the majority of that in the Cape Henlopen School District down here. I love to play golf. I was a presidential awardee for the Math K5 award, and I currently work at Amplify. And now, Ashley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Powell. I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. I am a K 12 district level mathematics coach in the Metro Atlanta and Cobb County School District. I love working out at 4:30 a.m. It's how I manage to get through the day. I have a beautiful 2-year-old niece who I enjoy spending time with. And a fun fact is I salsa dance for about 7 years and I can be the lead and the follow. So I know both parts.
Very nice. And then what we realized as we were making this slide is we could have expanded this middle section to much larger than it is now, but we condensed it. We met at Illustrative Mathematics. I was heading up the K5 curriculum and professional learning development. And at that same time, Ashley was leading the facilitation of the Illustrative Mathematics professional learning. So that is where we had the good fortune of meeting one another and just loving working together from that point on.
And Chris and I both have experience as classroom teachers and as coaches for teachers.
We are obsessed with student thinking. We can spend hours looking at sets of student work and just discussing what students know and what they're bringing to every task, which is just really exciting and such the heart of a lot of our work together.
And we both have 4-legged babies that we are obsessed with.
And another nugget of information is we are obsessed with reality TV and can talk about it for hours.
Specifically Married at First Sight.
Yes. So, to start our work in talking about leveraging student thinking to create on-ramps, we thought we would start with some framing around unfinished learning. So, Ashley.
Yeah. So I think, Kristen, it's important here to ground our audience in a shared definition of unfinished learning. And so we're going to start by agreeing that unfinished learning is knowledge and expertise we finished teaching, but students haven't finished learning. And just come to an agreement that unfinished learning is normal. It occurs in every subject for every student. Most students have more to learn when it comes to mathematics or any other subject. And so being able to leverage student thinking means utilizing students' lived and mathematical experiences to build upon.
And I think this became obviously more prominent during pandemic learning, but this has always existed. And so when you say unfinished learning is normal, I go, yeah, that's always existed. It just has become more prominent due to recent events.
So, for students to see the progression of mathematics and not these fragmented and isolated ideas, re engaging them in the earlier content within the context of grade level work is going to be essential. But we understand the complexity of this work. We understand that it's difficult work. And so, in our time as coaches, we often hear, yes, but I don't have the time, or yes, but I don't have the resources, or yes, but students in my classroom, their abilities vary in so many levels. And so we want to just spend some time today talking about how we shift from a yes, but to a yes, and.
Yes. And to do that, we really like to think about actionable steps that people can take. So we don't live in the more philosophical or theoretical land. We like to think about what does it look like for taking a process and using it in a school or in a district. So when we think about shifting to yes and, we thought about 3 steps that schools, districts, teachers can take. The first is to reframe the approach to unfinished learning. The second is to take that reframing and then use it to plan for timely and connected mathematical experiences. And then third, we want to think about how we can design and implement responsive on-ramps to grade level content. And as we were talking through these three steps, which will be the framing for our session today, we found it easiest to think about these in terms of what question are we trying to answer about each of them. So when we think about reframing our approach, we wanted to answer the question, how can an asset-based approach address unfinished learning? When we think about planning for mathematical experiences, we wanted to answer, what does it mean to provide just-in-time support for students? So moving away from the just-in-case support to just-in-time for students. And then thirdly, when we go to design and implement these on-ramps, we wanted to answer the question, how can leveraging student understanding support this work? And those will be the way we work our way through this session and hopefully end with a process that people can take and use as they're planning, especially for the upcoming school year. So, what does it mean to reframe the approach to unfinished learning? I think all of us agree that when we start a unit or we start a lesson, we have learning goals that we're driving towards, that students are moving toward. But when we start a unit or start a lesson, students are in all different places in their prior understandings or prior experiences. And what happens is when we look at the students who are maybe not right at the cusp of starting that new concept, we tend to call those spaces where students are gaps. And then what happens is we see that they have this gap in understanding and we attempt to patch it. It feels to me like a band-aid or something like that. And it's just addressing a really specific skill that the student has. But in this framing, it's really deficit based. When we tend to talk about gaps or hear people talk about gaps, they often are talking about what they see as student deficits. And then when we go to patch it, we're kind of ignoring that all of the knowledge and understandings that students are bringing with them. So this is the approach that we want to reframe from the very beginning, because we know that this approach just solidifies what we learned from the opportunity myth around the number of hours students are spending on grade level content. So in this particular study, out of 180 classroom hours, 133 of them were not grade level appropriate. And we know that this number is even more prominent when we think about students who are typically marginalized in our classrooms. And so this is a really important shift that we need to make in terms of how we think about unfinished learning and addressing it.
And so when we think about reframing our approach to unfinished learning and what that means, I want to emphasize that we don't view unfinished learning as gaps or holes in student thinking. And it's important in our work with teachers that we continue to emphasize that these are opportunities to support students in completing their learning in a skill or topic. And we do that by building on what they know. And we introduce this concept of on-ramps. So again, you can really see how the shift in language will support this idea of reframing. And so again, being able to build on what students know, we assume what they know and not what they don't know. And that way, as students begin to experience mathematics in new situations, it's not this superficial or brittle or broken sort of progression. And on-ramps allow students to spend a majority of their time on grade level content, building their confidence and allowing them to see mathematics as connected ideas. And again, not those fragmented, isolated events. And for teachers, that allows us to provide that just-in-time support for students. So again, you are positioning students as capable learners of mathematics and allowing them to maximize the time that they have to work on grade level content. And so the next step is to plan for timely and connected mathematical experiences. Let's take a look at what that means.
And this isn't something that is new. There's tons of research out there. Actually, we read a ton of it around how to address unfinished learning and how do we build on what students know. And so I could have pulled so many quotes from so many different places, but I thought this National Research Council excerpt was really powerful and like really grounded the work of on-ramps. So in thinking about children as natural learners who are seeking to understand the everyday world around them, and it's our job to help them make connections between new situations and familiar ones. Again, that's where that on-ramp, and I agree with you, Ashley, the language of on-ramp just sends a totally different message to me when I hear it than when I hear gaps. And so when thinking about making connections, on-ramp just feels like a really natural language that feels invitational and accessible for students. And they further go on to say that it's our job to focus students' attention by the way we structure the experience, organize the information, and that way we help them develop strategies for really intentional learning and problem solving. And so if you are looking to read more about it, National Resource Council has done a lot of work around connected mathematical experiences for students that I think support the work of on-ramps in a really ongoing way.
So we have this assessment data that we want to use in order to help plan for that timely support. And that data can come in multiple ways. It could be in the form of concepts that students may need support with. And that those concepts can be conceptual or they could be procedural. And even beyond that, it could be from multiple grade levels. And so, again, emphasizing that we understand the complexity and being able to sift through all of this information and figuring out what to do with it in order to provide support for students.
And Ashley, with this image, it just strikes me as that yes, but I could see if this was 25 students and you were getting data about all of them across these three dimensions and possibly more dimensions that it might report on, of how it can feel really overwhelming for the teacher. Like, how do I plan to address all of these different things versus concepts, whether they're conceptual, procedural? So I definitely, like you had said, I understand the yes, but because this could be really overwhelming.
So I want to spend some time looking at what happens when we have all of this information. We sort of end up with three ways that teachers can think about how to utilize this information in order to make connections. The first is we take this hypothetical volume unit and we front load that volume unit with prior grade level material. The
And are you
next
thinking, Ashley, that's all those bubbles? Like that prior grade level can be any of those bubbles. Is that what you're
Any of
thinking?
those things, definitely, yes,
Yeah.
and we're just trying to feel as much as possible in that front loading area so that
Mhm,
we see students as successful in that volume unit.
mhm. Right.
And then the second option we have as teachers is taking that volume unit and providing support in small groups with students. But those small group opportunities may be disconnected if I'm a student and I'm working on second grade addition and subtraction, um, but the unit is on volume, and so I'm not seeing how what I'm learning in small group will help me to be successful with that volume unit. And then the sort of third option is what Kristen and I are proposing as a solution for teachers. And that is taking your volume unit and instead planning for that timely and connected experience. And that means we're going to provide support that feels connected. And so, again, we understand that all of those things are important, but diving into what is necessary for your current unit.
Exactly. And I think those first two models are the just in case. We're going to do all the prior grade level and all the things just in case students need it in this unit, instead of the just in time, which is what concept, like you said, do they need to know at this moment? Um, it's not to say that the addition and subtraction and all that prior front loading content they were doing is not important and probably necessary for some students. It just means that adding and subtracting might show up later on in a unit that focuses more on fifth grade addition and subtraction. So now that we know our reframing of unfinished learning in terms of designing on ramps versus filling gaps, and Ashley has gone through how we can think about planning for those timely moments. Let's get into the weeds of what does it mean to design and implement on ramps? How do we make these things happen in our classrooms? So when we plan for an upcoming unit, there's a few things that we thought teachers could think about to help them really zoom in and target the unfinished learning. Ashley, do you want to take us through these steps?
Not at all. So the first step, we think we should identify necessary prerequisite understandings or skills. The second step is then using timely and helpful data to identify what students know. And then next, we're going to design that on-ramp experience. And that can happen in two ways. It could happen during core instruction, or it could happen during RTI or small group instruction, that intervention time.
Yes. So let's look at it. What does it mean to identify necessary prerequisites? How would a teacher know what they were looking to address?
So, to identify those necessary prerequisites, we know that understanding the progression helps us as teachers see where students are coming from and where they're headed. And so, we propose that you start by looking at your current unit and then identifying those prior grade level connections. We can use the Achieve the Core Coherence Map for that. And so, in this case, we're looking at 5MDC3. That's going to be that hypothetical volume unit here. And then when you map back, the coherence map shows you that that 3MDC5, which is area, is the necessary and timely prerequisite that students need. And again, not to say that multiplication or addition and subtraction won't be important, but for students to be successful with this unit, we're going to focus in on area as a prerequisite to ensure their success.
Yes. And so then once we know the topic that we're going to focus on, so like you said, if we're starting our year with volume, we have identified that prerequisite as area, how do we know what students know about that topic? And a lot of times our diagnostics or whatever beginning of the year, beginning of unit assessments that we give might not zoom in to what students know. You might get whether they're proficient or not. You might get a grade level that they're aligned to, and all of that data. But that's not really helpful in planning how to build on what students know. We need to know what they know. And so Ashley and I took some time just to think about how would we learn helpful information that helps us design activities about what students know.
And so the first one here allows us to have some conversations with students. And what I really love about this is that as a teacher, you can get that just in time observational data from students by simply asking them questions or giving them a prompt. And so with a prompt like this one, I can begin to see what my students bring to the conversation. Again, those lived and mathematical experiences. And I can take note if students are able to say something like, the area of this rectangle is going to be a multiple of 5. I can start to listen in for students who ask questions like, what's the other dimension? If they're looking at the relationship between those dimensions to realize that the product will be the area, and they recognize that area deals with multiplication.
Mm-hmm. And the thing, my teacher heart loves this because it's fast and I could see it going in a journal independently. I could just put it up as maybe a morning work prompt of just tell me, write down everything you know or have questions about. Or I could put it up to start my class for that day and just ask them to share out. And just the visual of that collective learning experience versus when we see teachers pull small groups to work on these concepts, it's usually more teacher driven, teacher directed, where I like this could leverage the collective understandings and experiences of the class. And so I think that's what's really nice about these more open ended prompts like you described. And then we thought, what if we wanted more targeted information? So we have the larger prompt that could give us all kinds of information, but we're not guaranteed that we're going to get the exact thing that we know in the activity that we want to design. So Ashley and I sat and just thought about what would be a progression of problems that would help us zoom in to what students know. So this progression of 3 problems, again, we thought really quick activity. It's really fast. The first problem would give us an understanding of, do students understand area as counting the square units? And then do they count? Like sometimes we'll see the pencil dots inside each square. Do they multiply to find it? Do they know how to record, square units, whatever their understanding of units might be? And then the second problem abstracts that a little bit more. It strips the grid away. So now we're just giving the two dimensions. It has a unit of measure associated with it, inches. So in this particular one, we could be able to see, do students know that you multiply the two side lengths to find area? Do they know it's recorded in squared inches here? And then we abstract it even further in the third problem, where now we're just giving them words with the two dimensions. And we bumped the number size up considerably just to get a sense of where are they with their multiplication of 2-digit by 2-digit. So if this is a fifth grade unit, that's a fourth grade understanding, and we can gather information around that as well. So just giving three simple problems, and simple meaning pretty simple to design, you just do a level of extraction every time, gives us a lot of information about students that we could leverage in building these on-ramps and more connected experiences. And so now that we have ways we can identify what students know, how do we design these experiences? And we broke this into two different parts, like Ashley had mentioned earlier. There's on-ramp experiences that we think can be done with a whole class, like they'd be great to leverage as a whole class, which is nice. I like things as a whole class response just because in terms of planning and pulling, and it feels really easy and manageable. But then we also thought about what could they do during RTI or intervention or whatever they call that small group time where teachers have opportunities to work individually or with small groups of students.
So starting with what this would look like in a core instructional time whole group, taking the information that you gather from either of those formative assessments, you can begin to adapt your activity launch. So as you begin to launch this activity, I can pull back those prisms and provide that two-dimensional layer there and have students to make connections to area. Are they able to identify the dimensions? Do they see the relationship that that layer has to the overall prism? And then I can layer in the rest of it to, again, allow students to see the connection between those activities.
Right. And as a warm up, I think that's a really great activity. Just like it feels natural to layer the area in just right there, like you said. I think that's great to launch as a warm up.
And then being able to adapt an activity in that same vein, I could have students begin to try to match those um, two-dimensional figures with the three-dimensional figure here. And again, just sort of layering that area in to see if students are able to make the connection between the dimensions and how that connects to volume when you begin to stack those layers on top there, as a way to connect those experiences.
And then, if you want to get really crafty, which we like to do, we think number talks, if you've never used a number talk, just to give you a little background, it's typically four expressions. One builds to the next, builds to the next, builds to the next. So they're really great structure for driving students toward an understanding, but scaffolding in a really nice way that brings out what students know and gives them the next nudge to the next understanding. So we took that structure, that design of a number talk, and we thought, what would it look like to design one for the area understanding of area? And we thought, oh, there might be a really fun way if we moved away from just the strict expressions. There might be a really fun way to design a number talk that has a visual that is associated with it that supports students not only in area understanding, but also gets at some of the multiplication things that might have bubbled up in that third problem. And if we think about that series of three problems, formative assessment wise, I see the first two actually being really addressed by the warm up adaptation and activity adaptation that you just shared. And I see the third one being addressed by this particular number talk string. So if we look at what we might do here, what we might do is we might start with a rectangle that is not gridded and just ask them what the area is. Again, leveraging those multiples of 10. So if students are struggling to multiply the larger numbers coming into fifth grade, we want to give them some structures to think about that. The area model is a great one. And then the second one we might show them once they've got this one and they shared some strategies for that, we share this one. Now we've taken that side length of 20 and just bumped it out to 23. So now getting to 2 partial products that we might have there, 200 and then 30. Once they've done that and we've shared some strategies and written on that, I keep doing this, I just want to write on it. I would have done the partitioning and written the partial products in. The third one, now I go back to this 20 being the same and extending the 10 to 13. So just showing that we can decompose both different ways on that model. And then we might end with this one where we ask them now to find more than 2 partial products by decomposing the sides. And then this string of problems really does support not only area because of the visuals that we are giving students, but it also supports their multiplication work that they'll really expand in 5th grade as they get to the algorithm eventually during that year. So this is a really nice way to on-ramp student thinking and really build a scaffolded way of thinking about both area and multiplication. And then if we wanted to think about small group time, I think that small group time could be a combination of any of the things that we shared for the whole group. Obviously, all of those can be done in a small group, but we also wanted to share just the idea that games as repeated practice is really nice reinforcement of not only area, but again, multiplication. This particular one, because the activity we had just shown is from the Illustrative Math K-5 curriculum, we pulled a center activity that's here. I think it's called Rectangle Rumble, where students are finding an area and then outlining the rectangles associated with that area, and they keep taking turns. So it's just a lot of repetitive practice of associating side lengths with rectangles, with area, and also just practicing the multiplication fluency. So we just wanted to give that a shot. Not that everything has to be an adaptation of the curriculum materials. You can actually pull things that you have in your resource bank and use those in small group as well.
And I love that center activity there because it allows teachers, if students are playing, for a teacher to listen in and observe where students are with those multiplication skills, but also making sense of areas. So I absolutely love those.
I completely agree. Great point.
And so now that we've had an opportunity to look at those 3 steps and reframing our approach to unfinished learning, we now know that all students have assets that we can build upon. And once we have a chance to say, yes, we're going to plan timely and connected mathematical experiences, we now know that students deserve to experience math as connected sets of ideas. Again, not those fragmented and isolated events. And finally, designing those on-ramps will support students in spending the majority of their time on grade level content.
And we thank you so much. This has been such a delight. And thank you to Ashley. I just always love working with her. And this has just been so fun in developing it and presenting it with you. And we thank all of you for listening in. And we hope that you can take these actionable steps back to your schools and classrooms and use them to on-ramp students to grade level content within the grade level work that you are doing and building on all of the wonderful things that they know and understand and bring to the classroom each and every day. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to hearing how this work plays out in your classroom. So please share back with us. Here's our email addresses and Twitter handles. We would love to stay connected and learn with and from you.